Hey, unpopular opinions. What's up? It's the Culture Detective here, investigating your favorite albums. And my next album to review in line is Pearl Jam's debut album, 10. After I finished reviewing all of the Death Grips albums so far, I have immediately hopped onto reviewing an Icelandic album that I have reviewed very recently, that I have listened to very early on in my life, and I loved it. And this is also an album that I've heard way before I started really, diving deep into a lot of different kinds of music. Yes, this is a long time ago. I've listened to this album. I think it's great. I think it's also great. So it's Pearl Jam's 10, and I'm only gonna review 10 by Pearl Jam, unless they drop another record that's like really good or maybe really bad. Then I'm gonna do another full length review on a Pearl Jam release. But other than that, let's talk about 10. So Pearl Jam is a band formed in Seattle, Washington, USA, and in the year 1991 they have released their debut album, 10, and it is this grunge rock, alt rock, maybe a little psychedelic rock kind of mix of an album, but that's not really the most accurate description of what kind of music that this band and this album offers. In fact, I think that the kind of music that this album offers is pretty unique. It's like it has the guitar riffs of a heavy metal song, but then it isn't as aggressive and loud, but it still has the rawness and the roughness. And I think the vocals, they are very masculine and muscular, but at the same time not that growly or again aggressive, not that angry. And the drums on this album are also really bombastic as well, but not necessarily fast, and usually really dynamic. And overall, the album just gives off this very filthy, dirty vibe, which is almost like a twisted version of old school rock music. I would also describe it as grunge music, but without the ugliness and the twangy sort of organicity. It's not a word, I know. And the songs on this album, they follow a pretty formulaic structure, but at the same time they come in different emotions and tastes, and they usually differ from one another slightly. So the album is consistent, but at the same time, it's not totally monotone. It still has a lot of different dynamic chord changes and drum beat changes throughout a song, but yet it still follows the normal song structures really strictly. So, usually we get some really dirty, filthy, and wild verses, and a really heroic and redeeming chorus, which I really love. No BS. This album is no BS, and again, the vocals by Eddie Vedder are amazing. They're one of a kind. They are unique, and it's really, really, really easy to spot out a vocal by the vocals by Eddie Vedder, because his voice is really unique. Anyway, the album starts off with the track Once, which kind of begins with these weird, slowly tiptoeing instrumentals with some cycling drum beats that are really slow and some vocal snippets fading in and out, and it's really dizzying and weird, and it almost kind of reminds me of some sort of religious hymn or some sort. But then it sort of fades into the back, and these sharp guitars sort of pierce through that wall, and then the bombastic drums arrived, and then Eddie Vedder's vocals arrived, and it's a really exciting and energetic start to an album. Not going to lie, it's very filthy and dirty as well, and it's an amazing opener for the album, a great tone setter as well. Once upon a time, I could control myself. Yeah, I just love how the chord progressions and the choruses and the verses, they are pretty simple, and yet they are pretty catchy, but not to the point where it's just straight up pop music, but also not so ugly to a point it's metal. It's just kinda in between. And then we have the second song, Even Flow, which is a really amazing song, really catchy and really underrated. It has a really fun, speedy, and thunderous guitar riffs backing up the song, and even though the verses are not as aggressive, they are really catchy and they build a lot of potential. And then we have the chorus, which is really catchy, heroic, redeeming, and it's a good time. Not gonna lie, Even Flow. It's yeah. And then at the last leg of the song, there's just this instrumental section where we get some really crispy guitar licks and the drum beat sort of synced up to the guitar lines, and it's just really amazing. It's sort of like and it's awesome. Great instrumentation, on point musicianship. And then the next song, we have the track Alive, which is slower, and the guitars are a little more idly, and occasionally we get some, chord progression changes at the end of each verse that sort of breaks that pattern once in a while, but at the same time, that also creates another pattern. Anyway, the chorus is really, really powerful. Oh, I'm still alive, yeah. I know I'm a terrible singer. Please forgive me if my singing is really that terrible. Anyway, this song is essentially about how Eddie Vedder has to deal with the fact that his father is really just his stepdad, and he actually has a biological father somewhere else in the world, and it must be a really painful thing to learn. And the emotions expressed in this song are really, really powerful, and I'm just glad that he would express all these thoughts and ideas through a song and make it so moving and impactful and yet so catchy, and it's just a great way to express thoughts in music. And also, there's a kick-ass guitar solo towards the end of the song. Anyway, up next we have the track Why Go, which has some cool punchy drum sequences and some deep-pitched guitars. However, the instrumentals here are a little bit rigid, even though the vocals are still great, and I feel like the song just doesn't have enough of an oomph for a great climax, so I guess the song isn't all that great. But the next song is titled Black, and it is one of the best Pearl Jam songs ever. It's a little bit more depressing, it's a little bit more slow, it has some uplifting and summery guitars, but the whole tone of the song and the lyrics of the song are actually way more sad and way more downtrodden. And the lyrics, they are really, really beautiful and well written, especially in the chorus where Eddie Vedder just goes, "And now my bitter hands cradle broken glass of what was everything." And the pianos backing up the song, they are absolutely beautiful and compelling, and overall it's just a really solid, beautiful, emotional, powerful, impactful track. And then we move on to the second page. We have the track Jeremie, which is a really heroic and redeeming song, and it is essentially about two different stories. One is that there's a kid whose name is Jeremie, and he had killed himself. And two, it's also about a kid whom Eddie Vedder sort of bullied when he was in high school, and how he almost, put the anger out on himself, but then at the end he got sort of a happy ending, I think. And so it's just this really moving and powerful message that, you can't just ignore, people's feelings, you can't just ignore these teens' feelings. They experience pain too, and it's a pretty powerful song, not gonna lie, especially when you consider how redeeming and heroic and just wild and amazing and feel good the chorus is. I really love how the chord progressions sort of change a little bit in the chorus. versus in the versus in the verses. I think the vocal layers in the song are also really uplifting. It has a kick-ass climax towards the end of the song as well, and again, catchy chorus. Jeremie spoken in class today. Up next, it's the track Oceans, and it's literally a song about how Eddie loves to surf. So there isn't that much of a depth when it comes to lyrics, but it's still pretty good, not gonna lie. It has some beautiful marching guitars and drums that are particularly gentle and soft when you compare it to other tracks on the album. And the chorus is really dreamy and otherworldly. And even though the song is not as wild and aggressive and powerful and gut punching, it's still not that bad, I guess, even though it's still one of the lower points in the album. And also, some of the vocals on this track are sort of compressed, and it's not really making the song all that good sounding. But still, it's not that bad. Up next, it's the track Porch, and it really defies what the previous track sounds like. It's really straightforward, raw, angsty, angry, wild, and it's a straight up alt-rock, hard rock track. It has some rough guitars, and Eddie Vedder singing is really speedy here. I love the guitar breakdown in the middle of the track, and the song is essentially about just having the balls to ask out the girl that you have a crush on. And it's just like, yeah, you know what? Just go ahead, ask out the girl. Don't be afraid. Don't be a pussy. Let's go. And it's a really fun song. So I love it a lot. And for the next track, Gardens, it's also really different from the previous track. It has some really calming, dreamy, and peaceful guitar licks in the beginning, and the verses are pretty slow, spacey, and disorienting as well. But then we hit the chorus, which gets really heroic, really epic, with some bold guitars underneath, and Eddie Vedder just screaming for his life as if he's on top of the tallest mountain in the world, and he just has to exclaim how powerful and moving that feeling is when you accomplish such thing. Anyway, the next track, the penultimate track, is titled Deep, and it has some pretty rigid guitar lines that are sort of like wop 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 sound quality. It has this kind of sound quality to it. The verses, they feel kind of disjointed, and the song overall feels the least solid. It feels pretty messy and ill-written. Definitely my least favorite track here, most definitely. And then we have the album ending titled Release, and it's 9 minutes long. And it's sort of split into two parts. The first 5 minutes being a really emotional and powerful and painful ballad, and then the last 4 minutes sort of being this instrumental that's actually the same instrumentals that you hear at the beginning of the album, even though it doesn't necessarily loop back to the beginning of the album, as the song just kind of fades out at the end. In the beginning, the song has some really sweet guitars that are just kind of looping, and some really heartwarming bass guitar line that's just sort of dwelling here, and it's a little country-esque, not gonna lie. And apparently, Eddie Vedder's vocals on this thing are improv. They are improv, and the lyrics here talk about. At first, it feels kind of aimless, but at the end, Eddie Vedder sort of drifts to continue talking about how he has to accept that his father isn't really his father, and it's a really beautiful, painful, and emotional song, and it feels really sincere, as none of the song is calculated beforehand. It's a very on the fly song. It's a really raw and organic song that's just being played on the spot with some really raw emotions, and I really like it. I really like it a lot. And then after the song ends, it just fades into the weird cycling instrumentals again. That's kind of disorienting and weird. And it's still a pretty nice, conclusive ending to the album, in my opinion. I think this album is great. I don't think it's legendary. It does have some softer spots on the album. Tracks like Deep, Oceans, and Why Go are not that great. They're not terrible. They're not bad. They're not great, however. But still, all the other tracks on the album are amazing, especially on the first half of the album. And I think this album had contributed quite a bit when it comes to grunge rock and alt rock. The renaissance, the rock renaissance in the late 90s and the early 2000s. So yeah, shout out to Pearl Jam. Shout out to all their contemporaries as well, like Nirvana and Red Hot Chili Peppers back then, which are also some of the most important bands when it comes to the rock renaissance that happened in the 90s. So yes, my favorite song here is it's a really hard pick, but I'm gonna go with Even Flow, and my least favorite is Deep. I'm giving Pearl Jam's 10 a 9 out of 10. So, have you listened to Pearl Jam's 10 from 1 to 10? How much did you rate it? Like if you like it. And subscribe if you want more, and thanks for watching. And you know what? I have to go to bed. I slept for 4 hours this morning.